A crisp, late November wind rustled the remaining golden leaves outside the prestigious Oakwood Country Club. But the real chill awaited Clara Miller inside the grand ballroom. Stepping through the heavy, brass-handled doors, Clara subtly smoothed the fabric of her understated silk dress, drawing strength from the memory of her husband's warm, reassuring smile just before he left for his late corporate meeting. It was the week before Thanksgiving, a season usually reserved for heartfelt gratitude and family warmth, yet the atmosphere she was walking into felt anything but thankful. The opulent main hall of the country club in this wealthy New York suburb was a dazzling, almost overwhelming display of excessive wealth. It was the Miller family's 40th anniversary corporate gala, an event meticulously designed by her parents to impress their peers and intimidate their rivals. Crystal chandeliers cast a glittering, fractured light over the massive room, illuminating heavy velvet drapes and towering, expensive floral arrangements. The air was thick with the scent of high-end designer perfumes and the quiet, calculating hum of upper-crust society networking. Waiters in immaculate white tuxedos glided flawlessly across the polished marble floor, balancing silver trays of vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Clara walked calmly beside her fiercely loyal best friend, Chloe, whose sharp eyes immediately scanned the room like a hawk looking for a threat. Clara, at 30 years old, possessed a quiet, elegant demeanor. She didn't need flashy jewelry or loud, recognizable designer logos to announce her presence to the world. Her years of dedicated work in the nonprofit sector had taught her the profound value of genuine human connection over superficial status. But in the Miller family ecosystem, financial status and public perception were the only currencies that mattered. Almost immediately, as if sensing a disruption in their perfectly curated environment, the family honed in on Clara, Mrs. Miller, a woman of 60 whose face was a testament to expensive cosmetic preservation, stood near the center of the room, holding court among her wealthy friends. As Clara and Chloe approached, Mrs. Miller's gaze swept critically over Clara's simple attire, her lips curling into a practiced, condescending smile. She spoke loudly, ensuring her voice carried to the nearby tables. "Oh my," Mrs. Miller declared, her tone dripping with mock pity. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Clara, I thought you were far too busy with that little small-scale charity work of yours. And you showed up alone again?" Before Clara could offer a polite reply, her older sister Stephanie glided over, a flute of champagne casually balanced in her manicured hand. At 32, Stephanie was the golden child of the family, married to a bank vice president and living entirely off the Miller family's wealth and reputation. "Honestly, Mother, some things never change," Stephanie chimed in, her eyes dragging up and down Clara's figure with blatant disapproval. "The last time we spoke, you mentioned you were seeing someone, Clara. Did you make him up? Or was he just too embarrassed to show his face here, knowing he'd have to stand next to my husband?" Chloe's jaw tightened. She took a step forward, ready to defend her best friend. "Her husband is doing just fine, Stephanie. Unlike yours, who spends more time swinging golf clubs than actually working." And Clara didn't come alone. She came with me. Jason, Clara's 34-year-old brother, swaggered into the circle, adjusting his custom silk tie. "Take it easy, Chloe. We're just having a family catch-up." He looked at Clara, shaking his head with an exaggerated sigh. "You're 30 years old, Clara. You're still driving that old mid-range sedan and living in a rented apartment. We all know why you're really here tonight, hoping Mom and Dad will hand out a little early inheritance to keep your charity afloat." Clara took a slow, steady breath. She refused to let their toxic words penetrate her inner peace. She knew the truth of her life, the deep, quiet security she shared with her husband, and she certainly didn't need her family's validation. She offered them a small, serene smile, Just then, the chaotic energy of Stephanie's two children, 12-year-old Maddie and 9-year-old Leo, interrupted the tense circle. The children, utterly undisciplined and spoiled beyond measure, were chasing each other recklessly through the crowd of elegant guests. Leo, clutching a glass of dark cranberry juice, deliberately veered toward Clara. With a sharp, malicious giggle, he bumped hard into her side, sending a splash of the dark red liquid directly onto the hem of her pristine silk dress. The children shrieked with laughter and bolted away into the crowd without a backward glance. Clara looked down at the spreading stain. Stephanie didn't even flinch. She took a sip of her champagne and offered a theatrical, insincere pout. "Oh, kids will be kids. Don't hold it against them, Clara. I'm sure that dress was just a discount store find anyway. It couldn't have cost much to replace." The cruelty was palpable, hanging in the air like a thick, suffocating fog. The surrounding guests watched with poorly disguised interest, waiting to see if the quiet Miller daughter would finally break, if she would raise her voice in anger or run from the opulent room in tears. But Clara maintained her absolute dignity. She didn't cause a scene. She didn't cry. Instead, she reached into her small clutch, retrieved a white linen handkerchief, and calmly dabbed at the stained silk. When she finally looked up, her eyes were completely clear, her voice chillingly polite and remarkably steady. "It's perfectly fine, Stephanie," Clara said, her tone as smooth as glass. "I didn't come here tonight to impress anyone with my clothes. I came here out of my final, utmost respect for the Miller name." Her words hung in the air, carrying a quiet, unshakable power that momentarily silenced her siblings and mother. Just as Chloe prepared to unleash her fury on Stephanie, the sharp clinking of a silver spoon against a crystal champagne flute echoed through the hall, signaling an announcement that would alter the family's destiny. The tension in that ballroom is so thick you could cut it with a knife, right? If you're still watching and finding Clara's quiet strength inspiring, please drop the number 8 in the comments below just to let me know you're here with her. And if you haven't already, I highly recommend subscribing to the channel and tapping that notification bell so you never miss a single update. Your wonderful support is what helps us keep creating great content to inform, uplift, and inspire you every single day. Now let's get right back to the story and see what that announcement is all about. The murmur of the elite crowd hushed as Arthur Miller Sr. stepped up to the mahogany podium, his chest puffed with the pride of a man who believed he owned the world. He adjusted his impeccably tailored tuxedo jacket, basking in the blinding glow of the spotlights that illuminated the grand stage. Below him, hundreds of influential guests from the upper echelons of New York society turned their attention to the patriarch, their faces glowing with the reflection of 1,000 crystal prisms hanging from the ceiling. In the dim light of the back tables, deliberately seated far away from the center of attention, Clara and her fiercely loyal best friend found their places among the shadows. Chloe squeezed Clara's hand beneath the table, the exact same protective gesture she had used since their college days. Sensing the public humiliation that was about to unfold, "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed partners and dear friends," Mr. Miller's voice boomed through the state-of-the-art sound system, dripping with an overwhelming sense of self-importance that had defined his entire adult life. 40 years ago, I built this corporate empire from the ground up, fueled by relentless ambition and a vision for absolute excellence. Today, we gather in this magnificent hall to celebrate not just our storied past, but the glorious, unbroken future of the Miller Corporation. He gestured expansively toward the velvet-roped VIP section in the front row, where his eldest son and daughter sat, practically vibrating with greedy anticipation. "It is with immense pride and a deep sense of accomplishment that I announce my official retirement. Effective immediately, I am handing over the absolute control, the majority shares, and the enduring legacy of this great company to my two exceptional, brilliant children, Jason and Stephanie." A wave of polite, synchronized applause washed over the sprawling room, accompanied by the gentle clinking of champagne flutes. Jason stood up, buttoning his custom-made suit jacket with a smug, victorious grin that reached his eyes, while Stephanie rose beside him, waving graciously to her wealthy peers as if she had just won a political election. But the patriarch on the stage was not quite finished. He gripped the polished edges of the podium, his gaze scanning the vast crowd until it locked onto the shadowed corner where his youngest daughter sat quietly. As for my youngest, Clara, he continued, his tone abruptly shifting from celebratory warmth to a coldly dismissive sneer, ensuring that the high-quality microphones picked up every ounce of his judgment so every single guest could hear it. Because of her rather unsettled lifestyle, her distinct lack of business acumen, and her stubborn insistence on isolating herself from our family's high standards, her mother and I have made a difficult but entirely necessary decision to protect the integrity of our hard-earned family assets and ensure the company remains in capable hands. Clara will be entirely excluded from the estate and any future inheritance. The massive ballroom grew uncomfortably, oppressively still. A few society matrons whispered behind their manicured hands and crystal glasses, their eyes darting toward the back of the room to catch a glimpse of the disgraced daughter. Chloe's face flushed with pure, unadulterated fury. She dug her designer heels into the plush carpet, her chair scraping loudly against the floor as she prepared to stand up, throw her drink, and scream at the arrogant man on the stage. But Clara's grip on her friend's hand tightened instantly, anchoring her down with surprising strength. Clara's face remained a portrait of profound, unshakable peace. She didn't flush with embarrassment, she didn't avert her eyes. She simply smiled. A soft, genuine expression completely devoid of any bitterness or hurt. She leaned in, her shoulder brushing Chloe's, whispering softly so only her fiercely protective friend could hear that she needed to stay seated, because the real spectacle hadn't even begun. Ignorant of his youngest daughter's eerie, dignified calm, Mr. Miller puffed his chest out even further, soaking in what he believed was the crowd's awe. Now, to formalize this historic transition and sign the wealth over to the next generation, I invite our longtime family wealth manager to the microphone. He stepped aside with a grand flourish, making way for a figure who starkly contrasted with the room's glittering, superficial excess. Attorney Evelyn, a woman of 55 known throughout the city for her uncompromising ethics and sharp legal mind, approached the podium. She wore a severe, impeccably tailored gray suit, her posture rigid, her expression completely devoid of the sycophantic smiles the Miller family was accustomed to. She did not nod at the polite applause that greeted her. Evelyn adjusted her silver-rimmed glasses, placing a thick-sealed manila dossier onto the heavy mahogany wood with a soft, definitive thud. She looked out at the sea of expectant faces, her sharp eyes briefly flickering with a complex mixture of professional pity and stern resolve when they landed squarely on the Miller family celebrating in the front row. "Thank you, Mr. Miller," Evelyn began, her voice crisp, authoritative, and entirely devoid of the celebratory warmth the patriarch had just commanded. "As your legal counsel and the executor of the estate's current structuring, it is my fiduciary duty to ensure that the transfer of assets is fully transparent to the new executive board, as well as to our stakeholders present tonight." She broke the seal on the folder, the sound of tearing paper echoing sharply in the quiet room. "It is absolutely true that you have the legal right to transfer your corporate shares to your chosen heirs. However, there is a highly critical financial reality that has been deliberately omitted from tonight's grand celebration." The silence in the ballroom sharpened into something brittle and dangerous. Mr. Miller's confident, camera-ready smile faltered, a bead of sweat suddenly forming at his temple. Down in the VIP row, Jason frowned deeply, exchanging a sudden, confused look with his sister Stephanie, who had stopped waving. The Miller Corporation is not the financial empire it once was, Evelyn stated clearly, her words dropping like heavy, unavoidable stones into a very quiet, very deep pond. It is, in fact, operating at a catastrophic, irreversible deficit. As of 9 o'clock this morning, the company is carrying exactly $15 million in toxic defaulted debt. Furthermore, the primary family estate, your sprawling mansion in the hills, has been heavily mortgaged multiple times, merely to cover the corporate payroll for the last 3 financial quarters. A collective, audible gasp ripped through the elite crowd. The quiet murmurs instantly erupted into a frantic, buzzing wave of shock, scandal, and disbelief. The wealthy guests openly stared at the Miller family, the carefully maintained illusion of their superiority and financial invincibility evaporating into thin air in a matter of seconds. On the stage, Mr. Miller gripped the podium, his knuckles turning white, looking exactly as if the solid floor had just vanished beneath his expensive leather shoes. The dynasty he had just so proudly handed over was nothing more than a mountain of crushing liabilities. "We are not bankrupt," Jason stammered, his face pale, to which Evelyn replied coldly, "No, but your entire debt was just purchased by Sterling Holdings." Heavy oak doors swung open with a resounding thud that seemed to shake the very crystal of the chandeliers above. The suffocating, panicked murmurs that had just erupted throughout the Oakwood Country Club ballroom were instantly extinguished, replaced by a profound, paralyzed silence. The name Sterling Holdings hung thick in the air, a name the youngest daughter of the disgraced family had lovingly woven into the quiet, simple routines of her daily life, though her parents and siblings only knew it as a distant, terrifying corporate monolith capable of swallowing businesses whole. The sheer weight of that revelation had barely registered with the high society crowd when the physical embodiment of their sudden financial ruin stepped across the threshold. 2 imposing men in dark, tailored suits entered first, their expressions completely unreadable as they smoothly secured the grand entryway, their sheer size demanding immediate compliance from the stunned guests. A second later, the man who now held the absolute fate of the Miller dynasty in his hands walked into the light. Arthur Sterling did not just enter a room. He commanded it without uttering a single syllable. He was a man who possessed a quiet, terrifying kind of authority, the sort that didn't need to shout to be heard. Dressed in a flawless, charcoal gray bespoke suit that spoke of generational wealth and meticulous taste, he moved with the predatory grace of someone who is entirely accustomed to winning. His sharp, handsome features were set in a mask of absolute icy indifference as his dark eyes quickly swept over the glittering, superficial sea of the New York elite. Up near the front stage, the illusion of power that the patriarch had clung to for 4 decades completely shattered. Mr. Miller's face, previously flushed with unearned pride, drained of all color, leaving him looking frail and desperate. The $15 million in toxic debt that attorney Evelyn had just publicly exposed was no longer an abstract number on a spreadsheet. It was standing right in front of him, breathing, observing, and holding the executioner's axe over his life's work. Panic, raw and unfiltered, seized the family. Survival instinct kicked in, overriding any remaining shred of their dignity. Jason, whose smug smile had entirely vanished just moments ago, violently shoved past a wealthy socialite, nearly knocking over a tray of expensive hors d'oeuvres in his frantic rush toward the entrance. Mr. Miller stumbled right behind his eldest son, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished marble. They practically threw themselves across the wide expanse of the ballroom floor, their faces stretched into the most pathetic, sycophantic smiles imaginable, utterly desperate to salvage their sinking ship. They intercepted the billionaire near the center of the hall, bowing their heads like terrified subjects before a ruthless king. Jason thrust his hand forward, his palm visibly sweating under the harsh chandelier light. He stammered, his voice cracking with the strain of his own terror. He introduced himself as the newly appointed head of the company, offering his most groveling, desperate pitch, while his father babbled incoherently about long-term partnerships and unfortunate financial misunderstandings, begging for just 5 minutes of the tycoon's precious time to renegotiate the massive debt. Arthur Sterling did not stop walking. He did not slow his measured pace. He did not even blink in their direction. It was a dismissal so absolute, so profoundly cold, that it stripped the two men of whatever meager pride they had left. He walked right past the trembling father and son as if they were nothing more than invisible dust motes floating in the grand hall. The crowd of wealthy onlookers parted frantically, scrambling out of his path like the Red Sea, too terrified to even breathe as the most powerful man on the eastern seaboard charted a direct, unhesitating course toward the dimmest, most ignored corner of the room. The rhythmic, confident click of his expensive leather shoes echoed in the dead silence of the ballroom. He bypassed the VIP tables. He ignored the frantic whispers. His sharp gaze remained locked on a single, unwavering focal point. When he finally came to a halt, it was in front of the small, shadowy table where the outcast daughter had been banished. The terrifyingly cold expression that had paralyzed the entire room instantly melted away, replaced by an overwhelming, breathtaking warmth that completely transformed his face. The ruthless corporate titan vanished, leaving only a deeply devoted man looking at the center of his universe. He reached out with profound tenderness, his large hand gently brushing against her cheek as he delicately tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. He leaned down, pressing a lingering, devoted kiss to her forehead, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume as if it were the only air he needed to breathe. He looked into her calm, beautiful eyes, a soft, genuine smile gracing his lips as his deep, resonant voice finally broke the absolute silence of the grand hall, carrying a gentle apology for keeping his wife waiting. Stephanie's wineglass slipped from her trembling fingers, shattering against the marble floor, a sharp punctuation to Mrs. Miller's choked, horrified gasp. "Wife?" Can you believe the look on their faces? That was truly a moment worth waiting for. If you're still watching and finding this story as satisfying as I am, please drop the number 1 in the comments below to let me know you're here. I would also love it if you could leave a meaningful comment or a warm wish for Clara. And if you haven't already, I warmly invite you to subscribe and tap that notification bell so you never miss a video. Your wonderful support is exactly what helps us keep creating great content to inform and inspire you every day. Now let's get right back to the story and see how the family handles the shocking reality. The sound of Stephanie's shattered wineglass echoed like the final strike of a judge's gavel in the stunned, suffocating silence of the Oakwood Country Club. The rich, dark red liquid rapidly pooled across the immaculate white marble floor, a stark visual representation of the Miller family's suddenly bleeding legacy. No one moved. The elite guests, who just minutes prior had been sipping champagne and celebrating a corporate succession, were now entirely paralyzed, completely captivated by the unbelievable scene unfolding in the dimmest corner of the grand ballroom. The air, previously thick with expensive designer perfumes and arrogant networking, now tasted sharply of metallic fear and absolute disbelief. Standing at the center of this sudden storm, Clara remained a picture of profound, unshakable serenity. The heavy, warm weight of her husband's arms securely wrapped around her waist anchored her. She recalled the cruel, dismissive sneer her mother had worn earlier in the evening while mocking her supposedly insignificant, small-scale business. A deeply insulting joke that was currently aging with catastrophic speed in the intimidating presence of the billionaire who entirely funded it, Mrs. Miller clutched the pearl necklace at her throat, her expertly preserved face contorting into a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her mouth opened and closed several times, desperately struggling to process the impossible reality standing right in front of her. She choked on the single syllable, unable to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the word wife, leaving the lips of the most powerful corporate titan on the eastern seaboard. Beside her, Jason aggressively shook his head, his meticulously styled hair falling out of place. His brain, wired only to understand worth through visible, ostentatious wealth, violently rejected the information. He stepped forward, his voice a frantic, high-pitched mess of denial. He pointed a trembling finger at his youngest sister, desperately trying to rationalize the situation to the silent crowd. He loudly insisted that there had to be a catastrophic mistake, vehemently arguing that a woman who drove an older, mid-range sedan and lived in a completely unremarkable rented apartment could not possibly be married to the owner of Sterling Holdings. He practically screamed that she only worked for a pathetic, struggling nonprofit organization. That was the exact moment Clara's fiercely protective best friend decided she had heard enough. Chloe stepped out from the shadows, her face lit by a devastatingly triumphant, gleaming smile. She looked directly at Jason and Stephanie, her voice carrying clearly across the silent, cavernous room, savoring every single syllable of the revelation. She loudly informed the entire Miller family and the hundreds of wealthy onlookers that Clara's supposedly pathetic little nonprofit was actually the primary charitable arm of the Sterling Family Foundation. She gleefully clarified that the organization they had spent the entire evening mocking was endowed with hundreds of millions of dollars, fully dedicated to helping those who actually needed it, rather than funding the superficial lifestyles of arrogant socialites. A collective, sharp intake of breath swept through the high society crowd. The humiliating truth settled heavily onto the shoulders of the Miller siblings, crushing their remaining arrogance into fine dust. Arthur's dark, commanding eyes shifted away from his wife and locked onto the family that had spent a lifetime treating her like a disappointment. When he finally spoke to them, his voice was dangerously calm, yet it possessed a cutting edge that sliced straight through the suffocating tension of the room. He explained with the icy authority of a man who suffered no fools that Clara had deliberately chosen to keep her maiden name and maintain a beautifully simple, grounded lifestyle. She had intentionally shielded herself from the toxic, relentless scrutiny of high society, preferring to do genuine good in the world rather than parade her immense wealth for the approval of shallow sycophants. His jaw tightened as he looked at the parents who had just publicly disowned their own flesh and blood. He stated, his tone dripping with profound disgust, that Clara had wanted to believe her family could love her for who she was, not for the balance in her bank account. He delivered the final devastating blow, declaring that her own family had just miserably failed the most basic, fundamental test of human decency. The full, terrifying weight of the situation finally crashed down upon the patriarch. Mr. Miller's face turned an ashen, sickly gray. The $15 million in toxic debt, the heavy mortgages on the family mansion, the entire future of his so-called empire. It was all legally owned by Sterling Holdings. And Sterling Holdings was owned by the man whose wife he had just humiliated and legally discarded in front of hundreds of people. Trembling violently, sweating profusely under the harsh chandelier lights, the old man took a pathetic, stumbling step forward. He threw away every ounce of his 40 years of pride, his voice breaking as he desperately tried to grovel. He babbled apologies, offering to immediately rewrite the succession documents, begging the billionaire to save their sinking company, suddenly realizing that his entire existence now rested entirely in the hands of the daughter he had just thrown away. Before Sterling, she remembered they watched. Clara slowly pulled the thick stack of legal documents from the envelope, the crisp sound of rustling paper echoing clearly in the deafening silence. Her calm, instead, they had just, the older, in a, she took it, despite their however, she affected, they were, Jason, the grand Jason, he shouted, but before, they didn't draw weapons or raise their voices. They simply took a single, unified step forward, forming an impenetrable, muscular wall of tailored wool and raw intimidation. The sheer physical threat they projected was absolute. Jason froze instantly, his reckless momentum dying in his chest as the brutal reality of his new, entirely powerless existence finally crashed down upon him. He stumbled backward, sinking into a nearby velvet chair, burying his face in his trembling hands as the magnitude of his ruin settled into his bones. Beside him, Stephanie was still sobbing loudly, desperately clutching her two bewildered children. But the surrounding wealthy guests no longer looked at her with pity. The high society crowd, infamous for their fickle loyalties, had already mentally distanced themselves from the disgraced Miller family. They recognized that the true power in the room had decisively shifted, and none of them were willing to risk the wrath of Sterling Holdings by offering comfort to the losing side. Clara didn't gloat over her brother's utter defeat or her sister's theatrical tears. The deep, fundamental kindness that defined her soul found absolutely no joy in their destruction, only a profound sense of closure. She turned away from the pathetic scene, gracefully looping her slender arm through her husband's. She leaned into his solid, comforting warmth, finding her true home not in the sprawling mortgaged mansion she had just saved, but right there by his side. She looked up into Arthur's dark, protective eyes and offered a soft, genuine smile. Leaning close, she whispered that the opulent room had grown far too cold and toxic for her liking, and she was finally ready to go home. Arthur nodded, his expression softening entirely for her, placing a tender, reassuring hand over hers. Their loyal friend, Chloe, however, was not quite ready to let the family off the hook without one last, exquisitely delivered parting gift. As Clara and Arthur began to turn away, Chloe linked her arm through Clara's other side. Her earlier anger had completely evaporated, replaced by a radiant, immensely triumphant grin. She paused just a few feet away from the weeping older sister, her sharp eyes gleaming with mischievous delight. "Oh, by the way, Stephanie," Chloe called out, her voice bright and ringing with undeniable satisfaction, perfectly cutting through the sound of the older woman's sobs. She gestured casually toward the beautifully understated silk dress that Clara wore, the very same dress Stephanie had so cruelly mocked and allowed her spoiled son to intentionally stain earlier that evening. "I know you have a deep, enduring passion for judging people by their price tags, so just for your future reference, you might want to brush up on your fashion knowledge." You see, Clara's dress isn't a discount store find. It's a custom, hand-stitched haute couture masterpiece straight from Paris. It's the only one of its kind in the entire world. But I suppose true elegance is something you actually have to be born with, rather than something you can just charge to a corporate credit card. Have a lovely evening. Stephanie's jaw dropped, her tear-streaked face flushing a deep, humiliated crimson as the surrounding socialites couldn't suppress a few quiet, amused chuckles at her expense. The final superficial weapon she had always used to belittle her sister had just been masterfully turned against her, leaving her with absolutely nothing. With that final, delightful blow delivered, Attorney Evelyn gathered her legal documents with a curt, professional nod, joining the united front. Together, the four of them, Clara, Arthur, Chloe, and Evelyn, turned their backs on the weeping, ruined family. They began their slow, dignified walk down the wide aisle formed by the stunned, silent guests. The wealthy onlookers instinctively parted to make way, their eyes filled with a newly discovered, profound respect for the quiet woman they had previously ignored. Clara held her head high, her steps perfectly synchronized with her devoted husband's, leaving the shallow, materialistic world she had never truly belonged to entirely behind her. The heavy oak doors pulled shut behind them with a resounding thud, closing the chapter on the Miller's arrogance and opening a quiet, beautiful night for a woman who had finally won. As Clara and Arthur walked away into the crisp November night, They left behind a powerful reminder that true wealth isn't measured by the designer labels we wear, but by the quiet grace we carry in our hearts. When we let go of our harsh judgments and choose to see others through the lens of unconditional kindness, we open the door to genuine compassion, often discovering that the most unassuming people hold the greatest power to change our lives. Reflecting on Clara's journey, I am deeply moved by the realization that responding to cruelty with pure dignity remains the ultimate, most satisfying form of strength. If this story of poetic justice and hidden warmth touched your heart today, please share its light with someone you love, and kindly subscribe to Retribution Raw as we continue to bring you more beautiful stories where goodness always finds its way back home. A crisp, late November wind rustled the remaining golden leaves outside the prestigious Oakwood Country Club, but the real chill awaited Clara Miller inside the grand ballroom. Stepping through the heavy, brass-handled doors, Clara subtly smoothed the fabric of her understated silk dress, drawing strength from the memory of her husband's warm, reassuring smile just before he left for his late corporate meeting. It was the week before Thanksgiving, a season usually reserved for heartfelt gratitude and family warmth, yet the atmosphere she was walking into felt anything but thankful. The opulent main hall of the country club in this wealthy New York suburb was a dazzling, almost overwhelming display of excessive wealth. It was the Miller family's 40th anniversary corporate gala, an event meticulously designed by her parents to impress their peers and intimidate their rivals. Crystal chandeliers cast a glittering, fractured light over the massive room, illuminating heavy velvet drapes and towering, expensive floral arrangements. The air was thick with the scent of high-end designer perfumes and the quiet, calculating hum of upper-crust society networking. Waiters in immaculate white tuxedos glided flawlessly across the polished marble floor, balancing silver trays of vintage champagne and delicate hors d'oeuvres. Clara walked calmly beside her fiercely loyal best friend, Chloe, whose sharp eyes immediately scanned the room like a hawk looking for a threat. Clara, at 30 years old, possessed a quiet, elegant demeanor. She didn't need flashy jewelry or loud, recognizable designer logos to announce her presence to the world. Her years of dedicated work in the nonprofit sector had taught her the profound value of genuine human connection over superficial status. But in the Miller family ecosystem, financial status and public perception were the only currencies that mattered. Almost immediately, as if sensing a disruption in their perfectly curated environment, the family honed in on Clara, Mrs. Miller, a woman of 60 whose face was a testament to expensive cosmetic preservation, stood near the center of the room, holding court among her wealthy friends. As Clara and Chloe approached, Mrs. Miller's gaze swept critically over Clara's simple attire, her lips curling into a practiced, condescending smile. She spoke loudly, ensuring her voice carried to the nearby tables. "Oh my," Mrs. Miller declared, her tone dripping with mock pity. "Look who decided to grace us with her presence. Clara, I thought you were far too busy with that little small-scale charity work of yours, and you showed up alone again?" Before Clara could offer a polite reply, her older sister Stephanie glided over, a flute of champagne casually balanced in her manicured hand. At 32, Stephanie was the golden child of the family, married to a bank vice president and living entirely off the Miller family's wealth and reputation. "Honestly, Mother, some things never change," Stephanie chimed in, her eyes dragging up and down Clara's figure with blatant disapproval.